Pop Shield, a long-form discussion podcast about musical topics both past and present. I'm Gabe, and I'm joined as always by Dan.
Hello.
And Aaron.
Hello.
So I'd like to kick things off this week by asking you guys, what have you been listening to lately?
I've mostly been listening to a shit ton of Fela Kuti and late John Coltrane. What about you, Darren?
I got really into Animal Collective, early Animal Collective, and even the most recent Animal Collective record, surprisingly.
Wow.
Yeah, and on top of that, I know this might be cheating, but I did listen to this Rewatchables podcast for the first time. I don't know if you guys have heard of that one from the Ringer. I listened to the Inception episode. You guys remember that movie?
Sure,
yeah.
Sure I do.
How you feeling about that movie now, 8 years later?
Yeah, I feel kind of similar to our topic today, where I feel like I ought to revisit it because in my mind it hasn't aged that well. But
yeah,
we'll get to that. I mean, I've been listening to this album by J Glass Dubs called Epitaph that just came out last week, actually. And I think it's my first. I really like this album of the year of 2019. It's kind of like from the world of electronic dub, but just like so dense it's almost shoegaze or something. It's definitely cool. But all right, having gotten that out of the way, let's jump into today's topic. So believe it or not, January 6th, that was just a few weeks ago, was the 10th anniversary of the release of Animal Collective's Merriweather Post Pavilion. And like many critics and listeners, we've decided to mark the occasion by reflecting on how well the record has held up. I think what makes this such an interesting record to revisit is the fact that, calling it universally acclaimed would be a massive understatement. It was pretty much instantly declared Animal Collective's crowning achievement, a masterpiece of the 2000s, and a game changer in the world of indie music. And yet the last 10 years have been very unkind to Animal Collective in general, and Merriweather in particular. Most of the retrospectives that I saw decided it hasn't aged so well after all, and it didn't really change the course of popular music as much as it seems like it should have. So I'm hoping that we can get to the bottom of this album's perplexing legacy, but let's start back at the beginning. I want to avoid spending a lot of time on background info, but do you guys remember the enormous hype leading up to Merriweather's release?
Yeah, I do. I remember it leaking a little early and stuff. And
in 2008, actually, right?
Yeah,
No.
Or no.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
it was here's the thing. The thing was, it actually just a couple songs leaked, and then I think they actually pushed the release date forward because it was a big mess. It released in full a little bit early, but yeah, you're right. 2008.
I miss those days of shit leaking early. Those good times. Good times.
But the hype was there before anything leaked. You know what I'm talking about, Darren? I mean, I think it was mostly the fact that 2007 had been this crazy year for them because they dropped Strawberry Jam and Person Pitch, which were two of pretty much everybody thought the best albums of the year. I mean, you remember the hype, Darren?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I believe it was the shows following Strawberry Jam and Person Pitch where they started playing Merriweather songs, and I remember downloading some of those bootlegs because Animal Collective was kind of always been known for just experimenting a lot during their live shows, but this was the first time where it sounded like they were really working out or playing actual new songs live, and I mean I was eating all of that up prior to the release.
Wow, so you were real deep. I mean, I was I want to talk about what kind of Animal Collective fans were we before this? Sounds like Darren is the kind of fan that was searching out bootlegs and everything of unreleased material. I wasn't doing that exactly, but we'll talk more about it probably, but I was, profoundly obsessed with Strawberry Jam, but especially Person Pitch, which I thought was just the most amazing thing I had ever heard at that time. I think my Animal Collective fandom, probably went back to around the time of Feels, which I thought was, just game-changing for me personally. Of course, I went back and dug through all the old stuff at that point, and it just built and built. But Person Pitch had me thinking these might be the great, this might be the next Beatles or something like that. What about you, Dan? What kind of Animal Collective fan were you?
Yeah, I wasn't tracking down bootlegs like Darren either, but I was like a moderate fan. Like I liked Strawberry Jam and like Feels, but I wasn't super into them yet before Merriweather, really.
Yeah, I was struggling to try to remember like the precise moment, but I'm pretty sure, Gabe, you had introduced me to that song Grass, the second song on Feels.
Yeah.
And that was my first introduction into Animal Collective. And I want to say I just immediately loved it, like right from the beginning. And I think that the connection was that, and you mentioned this actually in our last episode, that, you know, and Pitchfork was part of this, but like you almost immediately felt like you could do what Animal Collective was doing. You know what I mean? Like there was just this instant connection that like, wow, I'm listening to a, you know, band of my time that I feel like, you know, is doing like the weirdest shit I've ever really heard. You know what I mean? I could do this type of thing. And it was just instantly inspired. So I dug into like, you know, Sung Tongues, which is just the weirdest album then, and it still is now, even going back to it. So Strawberry Jam I liked a lot, but I think I was like really like much more connected to Feels.
You guys weren't big Person Pitch people?
I like
I never really. Yeah, I like it, but I've never been super into it. I don't love the Beach Boys and all that, so, you know, it's kind of not my... Yeah, let's not get started on that.
What are you doing on this podcast again?
Yeah, I mean, Person Pitch for me was just like stunning. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that was like the seal the deal moment, which was Grass, because yeah, it kind of sounded like something that I could make with my band. And we'll sort of keep circling back, I think, to their past stuff. But there was just something like so exciting about how, you know, the chorus is just like this burst of just clipped like screams. You know, it was just, if you feel like screaming, you know, on the over the chorus or whatever, just do it. It just sort of was this burst of creativity. I mean, it was so exciting. So we'll keep circling back to the kind of old stuff, the compare and contrast. But what did you guys think about Merriweather when it first dropped?
I mean, I basically loved it right away. I thought it was sort of unlike anything I had heard at the time, and I just instantly loved it, you know?
Yeah, I just completely consumed it. I was like nonstop listening to this album from the moment I got it. I can't even remember, I cannot recall a moment thinking that I didn't like it or didn't want to listen to it or whatever. Like this was just the album of that year for me, basically.
Wow. I feel like I'm in the minority in that I couldn't get into it. I really struggled to connect with it, even being this absolutely obsessive Animal Collective fan. It just wasn't. It wasn't like what I loved about Animal Collective. It was. We'll get into it, but it just felt dense and impenetrable to me. It didn't have like these big wow moments. Of course, something like My Girls was, enormously catchy, but I couldn't get into it. And, you know, I want to sort of get into this, but I would try every couple of years to listen to it because I felt like I was missing something. And there were a good couple of years where, you know, it was just meme to death. The album that launched 1,000 memes, you know, just everybody was posting this on Mew and stuff all the time about it's the greatest thing ever. And, you know, I just always felt like I was missing out. I feel like these last 2 weeks that we decided to do this was the first time that I really tried and partially succeeded. I'll leave that as a tease. But when you guys first heard it, did it strike you as like a big change in their sound or some big forward step that everybody was proclaiming it?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of immediately pick up on it. I would say at least in, you know, with My Girls, because previous to this record, you know, there just wasn't a whole, like, I just don't feel like that Panda Bear's presence was as enormous.
I think that's true,
yeah. Throughout the songs. And I also don't think that, like, Avi Tare and Panda Bear were, like, singing together, like, nearly as much as they did on this album. So just that alone, like, their two voices, like, coming together.
And they're up front and center, right? I mean, they're really mixed.
Right. It's totally different. Like, I mean, it was almost like a total departure from, you know, anything before. I mean, Strawberry Jam, I think, had some of the kind of feel to it. But like, just to go back, 2 years to Feels? I mean, two totally different records, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it is pretty different from the previous stuff, but I wasn't like this huge Animal Collective fan at the time or anything. So, it wasn't like a big change. I think maybe you sort of alluded that was your problem with it, Gabe. Like, I agree that it is like a lot more dense than the other records and everything. But I don't know. It just like was so different from other things I've heard that it struck me right away. But I think it was a big change in the sound. Especially if you go far back, Dance Manatee or Spirit They're Gone,
yeah.
It's 1,000% different.
Yeah, and we should mention, Deacon is their basically guitarist. I think they all are kind of trading instruments all the time, which was another really cool, liberating thing about Animal Collective. Like, they were so creative, they just play whatever's in front of them. But yeah, so Deacon, for reasons that I guess are still a little unclear, just personal reasons, decided he wanted to sit out this round, this batch of new songs, this album cycle. And so they were without their main guitarist, and that's part of the reason why they went into this very electronic, almost electropop indie sound on Merriweather. So that's really strikingly different. But they also talk about how the success, and I'm not talking like commercial or critical, but just in their minds, how much they loved Person Pitch as an album, really inspired them, I guess, to kind of use that Panda Bear aesthetic in crafting this very new type of music. I mean, how would you describe to somebody who had never heard this album what this album sounds like?
Well, I would probably have to reference, the Beach Boys. I'd probably reference Smile, maybe. And then I would say, if you've listened to like Person Pitch, because I think Person Pitch is like is Panda Bear's aesthetic on steroids. I mean, it is just Panda Bear at this point, right?
Yeah,
it's that marrying into the
Beach Boys melodies, or the
Beach Boys melodies, but also like the Animal Collective, Avi Tear, basically. Like, it's a really interesting blend, and I feel like it's the only time that it kind of like balances itself out, where it's not too much of Avi Tear's style, and it's not too much of Panda Bear, which would have been more on like the Person Pitch side, And I know that if you haven't listened to those records, it's hard to describe that, but to me, that's just how I make sense of it.
Yeah, I think you describe it perfectly. I don't know if there's anything I can really add. It's that Beach Boys married with the like just kind of weirdest things you can think of. Electronics, whatever. It's just like a extra weird Smile, Pet Sounds kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, but the arrangements don't really strike me at all like the Beach Boys. It's really these harmonies that are lush harmonies all over the record. But the sound of it is really strange. I mean, I think it's made primarily with samplers, and it's got a very like electronic arpeggiating synth sound, but it's got a rather harsh sound. It sounds like these damaged, almost modular synth type sounds or something, or maybe sampled and resampled to the point where it's degraded. I mean, there's something really rough. People talk about this like it's this really glittery, warm thing, but I find the sound of the synth lines that are all over this very abrasive. Am I alone in that?
No, I agree. There's definitely some abrasiveness, but it is really glittery, and I think that's where that modular synth kind of thing comes in. But yeah, I mean, it gets rough and harsh at times, but I think the glitteriness kind of prevails.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds clean, but you're right that like at the center is this like very abrasive synth sound, and in fact I think only like No More Running is really the only time where things kind of settle down into a much quieter song. Yeah. I mean, everything else is very loud, very upfront and center, not a whole lot of like, little things going on in the background that you can even tell because it's just so loud. I mean, even the drums are like buried behind the synth sound, you know?
I mean, I think about the first song, In the Flowers, where you've got these kind of glittering, almost sounds like a picked guitar, but run through a lot of effects. It almost sounds like something you would hear on Feels. And then these pounding drums, you know, which is kind of like a pounding tom, which is really a trademark of Animal Collective, comes in. But then it's like overwhelmed, you know, in the part where it surges up with a drum machine that has booming low end comes in and just almost like wipes out the tom sound. And then these huge like wall of just glittering synths, which again I think are weirdly harsh in a way. They're almost like damaged, like artified synths, and they just wash over the whole thing. So that's how I think we can keep sort of circling back to this. But obviously this is the first record that Animal Collective did not self-produce. They actually got a producer, not somebody really well known at all, but somebody who had worked on as an engineer on stuff like Gnarls Barkley and some of the Bad Boy records from the 90s, because
weird.
I guess they were interested in that like booming low end, which is also a huge part of this record. But as we kind of and we talked about the vocals, how they're more upfront. There's just some bigger, more upfrontness to this record, I think, than anything that they had made before. On that note, have you guys listened to this album much in the past 10 years?
It lasted like when it came out, I was listening to it a ton, and I think it lasted. I think me and you, Gabe, we saw them live. I think it was 2011.
Yeah.
And
right after this album.
Yeah,
I was there, or I saw them. I don't know if
you
wasn't with you guys.
You went to the tour before that, like when Black Dice opened, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we went to the next show.
We'll get to that. Yeah,
we went to the next show. But yeah, it basically lasted up until around 2011. I think like after that show, because at our show they played like all of Centipede Hurts and years before it came out. Yeah. And it just kind of that's when it started to wane on me. And since then, I've probably popped it on, but I can't really remember the last time, since 2011.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be honest, I haven't listened to this record almost at all. I mentioned that the year, it came out 2009, I listened to it a whole lot, but 2010 was probably my favorite year in music, and I left this album behind, and I never came back to it. I never came back to this or Animal Collective, and I mean, we can get into that maybe a bit later, but I don't know. It just kind of fell off immediately.
If I'm understanding you right, Darren, for a good year or two, I mean, this is one of your favorite albums like ever, and then it just vanishes from your life.
Completely just vanished. Like I don't even know. Like if you are a listener of the old Metaphoric podcast, you may have heard me more than once like just shit on Animal Collective, either on air, maybe it was off air, I don't remember, but I was not afraid to just sit there and say, they have aged. They're probably like the worst when it comes to like how their records have aged.
Well, that's exactly what I want to get into. I mean, I think that's what makes this such a fascinating record to discuss. Why a bunch of people were talking about it. I mean, because there's some album anniversary every single day, and for some reason, this one is really interesting to revisit because it went from being the best album ever to this enormous backlash. So I want to get into that, but we all were tasked with taking a deep dive into this album the past 2 weeks. How did it go?
I'll be honest. At first, I struggled to like stop listening to the stuff I wanted to listen to and to get back into this, And in fact, I was like driving, my wife and I were driving somewhere, and I was complaining that we were listening to Fela Kuti, and I was complaining that I had to listen to this record, and she like wanted to listen to it. She still likes it, and like kind of forced me to. And then I got into it from there, but it was slow going for sure. But I eventually did kind of get into it. I got a sense of like, nostalgia for 10 years ago or whatever, remembering listening to this record and all, but it's hard to tell like what my enjoyment of the record was. It just like, I remember enjoying this record, or was I like currently enjoying it? So I think I was a little bit, but it was a bit of nostalgia happening there. What about you, Darren?
Yeah, I think you said it, Dan. Nostalgia was a huge factor. I wasn't excited to put this record on because I hadn't really been excited or interested in listening to it in the last 10 years.
Right.
But I gotta say, almost immediately when I started listening to it, I was brought back to 10 years ago. And, Gabe, you know as well as I do that Animal Collective was a huge influence on, the band that we were in. The little collective, the local collective that we had was modeled after the idea of Animal Collective. And it just all kind of came pouring back in, and I was like, I missed this record. And then over the course, probably in the second week, closer to today, I started to feel like, you know what, it's not just nostalgia. This album is actually incredible. And then jumping around to Centipede, I even listened to the record that came out last year, and I was like, man, they really fell off. But
yeah.
I listened to their earlier records. I listened to Panda Bear again, and I was like, this record is their very best, and it is still good. And I don't know why I left it behind, but it is still an amazing record. Yeah.
I am very surprised because when we first decided to do this episode, I think I just texted you guys, hey, it's the 10th anniversary, and you were both like, sucks, old news. I really, I almost expected, and so here's my thing, is that as somebody who couldn't ever really click with it, I don't know if it clicked this time, but it's the closest I've ever gotten, where I really was appreciating it a lot. The first couple spins, I was like, God, I can't get into this. It's like I was remembering all the reasons I couldn't, and it's that sound I was talking about, because their earlier albums, I mean, especially Strawberry Jam, if you think about it, it's like, these just so many different styles and sounds, all the time, changing all the time. And I think we'll get into some of these comparisons, but I re-listened to Feels this past week, and I was like, every track is its own world. It is incredible, and Merriweather is very much one thing over and over again.
I agree with you, because I went back and I listened to Feels, Strawberry Jam, Sung Tongs, and Dance Manatee, and I thought the same kind of thing, but I thought it. I looked at it, Merriweather, as a positive. Merriweather feels much more like a record than some of those other ones. Some of the other ones, even earlier you go, they're a little mishmashy, and I don't know. Merriweather just seems like much more of a singular vision, which I love the album as a giant piece.
Yeah, I think, the thing that really stuck out when I went back to Sung Tongs and Feels and everything was that there's a certain aesthetic to those Animal Collective records. You get this vision of a campfire where people are just sitting around with acoustic guitars and whatever kind of instruments and just doing the craziest, most experimental type of stuff with pop style songs, right? And they come out incredible, and there's all these animal themes, and just they're just wild and crazy, and it's fun. It's totally fun. But Merriweather just feels like it's almost it's kind of like they finally sat down and said, all right, we are going to create the most well designed pop record in the Animal Collective style. You know what I mean? We're going to write every song together. We're going to harmonize as much as possible. We're going to bring our styles together into one, rather than taking one particular style and building a world around that, then the next track doing another style and building another world.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
It's got a maturity in that over some of the other ones.
It does. I mean, I'm a fan personally of the kind of kitchen sink style album. It's obviously not the only kind of album I like, but all of my favorite albums are kind of in the mold of the Beatles' White Album, where each song is its own world, and there's so much to discover, and you can listen to it over and over again, and you find little things you never noticed before. Feels is, I mean, just massively diverse. There are, so many styles, so many, I mean, tracks like, Banshee Beat is like 8.5 minutes, and you can explore that whole thing and find stuff that you've never heard before every single time you listen to it. Merriweather, you guys talk about it like it's a positive, but I think this is what was preventing me, a huge Animal Collective fan at the time, from getting into it, because it is extremely cohesive, and I gotta say, a little bit to a fault, because musically every song is basically that same kind of formula of these glittering, super dense, super huge synths, arpeggiating synths and things, and these kind of booming, almost abrasive low end sounds. And it's is it just me, or what I can't decide, right, is that it's almost stunning the way it starts, and then by the time I get to something like Bluish, Guy's Eyes, Taste, Lying in a Coma, it just is like blurring together. I'm like, I'm losing track of where I am.
Lying in a Coma might be the best song on the record, man. What?
No, that's definitely the worst, I will say.
What?
I'm on team Darren here. That's a good track. I do think kind of like Bluish, Guy's Eyes, Taste, especially Guy's Eyes, like kind of blur together, and you're like, I'm getting a little fatigued here. But then Lying in a Coma kicks your shit, and it's great.
Oh, yeah.
Because really the last three, Lying in a Coma, No More Running, Brother Sport, it's like a triple threat right there.
Yeah.
See, I'm of the opinion that No More Running is like a very good song, but I can't like it that much because I'm so exhausted by the time I get to it, because the last like 3 songs have all been a little dull. And they're not dull in like they're not bad. I'm kind of joking. Like Lying in a Coma is fine. They're all fine, but they, so often I think on this record, especially in these first couple songs, you think about My Girls, the arrangement is not that special or unique, which is new for Animal Collective to me, was new to me, that I didn't find the musical part that special. But these harmonies and these vocal melodies are just managing to emerge from the murk and just soar. And it almost works as a really nice counterpoint. Like, something like My Girls, it's almost catchier because the music is, the musical arrangement is not trying to do too much. It's really setting the stage for these soaring melodies. And a lot of those songs, Summertime Clothes, those songs are all working on that level. And then you get these couple songs that I just mentioned that the melody is good, but it's just not good enough to emerge from the murk. You guys completely disagree with me?
I mean, I totally disagree about anything you had to say about Lying in a Coma. I agree with you on My Girls. It's actually not one of my favorite songs on this record. But that whole like melody and that looping melody where they just repeat and repeat and repeat, and they do that on like several of the songs throughout the album, I think is really cool. I think it's like a really interesting idea. And this was actually the first time that I kind of dug into like the actual lyrics, like what was actually being sung, and I was almost shocked because I was thinking like, well, did I not care about this stuff in 2009? Because I had no idea what any of these songs were about, I guess. Like songs like even like My Girls, because like something that bothers me a little bit about Panda Bear is like he's very difficult to understand, and I know the point is not to really understand what he's singing, but that song was a song that I thought I knew what he was singing, and I was very surprised by what the actual lyrics were, and I don't know what was wrong with me in 2009. I guess I didn't care, but
a lot of their songs, and it's actually weird. You mentioned it earlier just briefly, but a lot of the songs on this record are about these kind of I don't know, like concerns about like in the world of growing up, you're just kind of like concerned
very,
about
mundane type of
mundane things, being able to provide for your child or something like
house,
that. And Brother Sport has a kind of a touching his father died, and he's kind of urging his brother to not be so closed up about it, and it's a real contrast to their earlier stuff, which was almost about recreating childlike wonder and terror and getting inside the mind of a child. This is like Animal Collective grew up all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's why, like I said earlier, like this album has like a little bit of maturity, and I think that's why it works with the, more, put together, more arranged kind of sound. Because it's funny, you said that you looked at the lyrics and stuff for the first time. I did the same thing. Like I kept following along on Genius because I realized that I really didn't know what the fuck he was saying half the time. Maybe it was just because like we didn't have a good lyric website back in 2009. But
that might have been it.
It's true. It's very true.
Couldn't trust anything.
No, yeah, exactly, because it was just like some Yahoo doing it. But but yeah, I was like sort of impressed with the lyrics and stuff, like Brother Sport, My Girl, all the, and maybe it's that like I'm an adult now too, so maybe I've grown to the point where they were on this record or something, but I don't know, it's got like this real maturity compared to some of the earlier stuff.
It does. It has like a nice heart to it, and yet I can't be the only one that thinks every song is 2 minutes too long.
Some of them are. I'll give you...
Almost all of them. They are all like 5.5 minutes, and they just... they sound like they're going to...
It is a 54-minute or 55-minute almost record. That is getting a little long. I'll agree. Not every song is 2 minutes too long, but definitely some of them are. I even think I like My Girls a lot. I remember like when that video first came out and stuff. It's like super rad.
Oh my god!
But it goes a little too long when it has that like.
It takes like 3 minutes to start.
Yeah. It like and that you're waiting for that first like kind of switch in the song. Yeah. Once that happens, banger. But yeah, that little first part. Yeah. If you got rid of it, I wouldn't miss it.
How about like I think about Also Frightened, right? It builds in this way that's like, it's just sort of like building, and it's like a slow, the first kind of slower, spookier song almost, and then it sort of crescendos in this like, are you almost frightened? And it should end after that, but it's just like, no, let's just do the verse again, and we'll kind of do that whole build up a second time. I mean, it's thrilling when it happens the first time. Right. The second time, I know it's coming. No,
yeah, I completely agree. I also Fright. I love the like little kind of intro to it. I don't know what like is making that sound, but it's like really rad. But then once it crescendos, you're like, oh yeah, and going through it the second time is not as great. I agree with that one. But there's some song like Summertime Close, I think is
still too long. 2 minutes too long.
No, I think it's a perfect running time. No, I think that song is
3-minute pop song that is 5.5 minutes long.
It's 4.5, but okay,
whatever. All right, so 1 minute too long. You disagree, Darren?
A little bit. I mean, I do think that My Girls. I think that's a good point, and even Also Frightened a little bit long. But I like I mentioned before, like I liked the looping and the repeating of things.
I mean, sometimes it works. Like Daily Routine ends after 2.5 minutes and then just kind of does this like droney singing the verse slowly thing for like seriously 3.5 minutes. And at first I was like, see, this is exactly why I cannot fucking stand this record. And then like by the end of 2 weeks, I was like, I actually kind of like that. Like I like getting lost in that. I feel like that's what they were going for throughout this record is these songs will be big and they'll be, absorbing, like you'll just get lost in them. And, I feel like the only time they really succeed is Brother Sport, the outro of which I would listen to like an hour remix.
That is the best version of what I've been describing, basically.
But see, you see what I'm saying, Darren? How it's like, I feel like that's what they were going for with every song, but a lot of the songs outstay their welcome. That's the one where you want it to go on forever. Yeah. But it just doesn't work on the others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it works on Summertime Close. I think that's a perfect song, like through and through. I feel like In the Flowers, really
lovely song.
I think it really
that one does it. It does one crescendo, and then it just comes
builds
back
up
down.
So perfectly.
It's perfect.
But I wanted to go back to you had a while ago. You had just mentioned that your favorite types of album are like molded in the white album type of experience. Yeah, and I feel like this album is a little more of like a like an Abbey Road or even like a Let It Be, in the sense that like Avi Tear and Panda Bear are like the John Lennon and Paul McCartney. You know what I mean? Whereas on previous records, you know, you'd have a very much an Avi Tear like solo song. And I mean, of course, the other band members are doing things, but I mean, he's the only one singing generally, right? And you have then like the record like Person Pitch, which I don't really like that much, to be honest. I feel like it's like it's just so buried in reverb, and
love it.
It's just too much. It's too extreme. And sometimes we talk about Beatles records in the sense that, like, you know, it's just so great that you have like a John song after a Paul song or whatever, because it just balances itself out. And the truly best Beatles songs, or some of the best, are obviously ones where they are both very much present on the song. So here, I think, you know, the best songs, and thankfully most of the songs have both of them featured on it, and it just works so well. Because like, I love Panda Bear's, you know, voice, I really do, but I love how like Avi Tear comes in like underneath it and is adding just a whole nother like layer to, even if he's like repeating lyrics or if he's trying to harmonize or whatever it is. Like, I just think that works so well, and they just never come back to that in the records after this, and they weren't really doing that much before. So I don't know why this is the one record that they seem to wanted to do this on, but I just think it works so well.
They do sound very, very tight. And I think we can transition now into trying to figure out why it was so acclaimed at the time. I think part of it is the tightness. I mean, this is, well, it was at the time, I guess, their most accessible record, I think, by a long shot. It's tight, even though every song goes on too long, but the melodies just feel crafted to perfection. They don't take any really weird detours. We talked about how the vocals are up front and center. And I was going to mention, to your point, Darren, Avi Tear was formerly like a complete madman, you know? Mm-hmm. He might just, like on the Chorus of Grass, if he feels like just screaming over and over again during the hook, that's what it's going to be. It might actually not even happen during the hook. It might just happen in the middle of the verse. He might jump up like 3 octaves and just go into a crazy falsetto sound. You know, there was something like unhinged about him, vocal extremism, you could call it. And he doesn't do any of that on this record. Yeah. He's like playing it real straight. He's like a real grown-up songwriter. You know, that I think am trying to get at why it was so acclaimed at the time, but also why the backlash, that might be the reason for both, or part of the reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think Darren made a good analogy. You know, this is sort of the Abbey Road, where the older ones are sort of the White Album thing. And, you know, I don't know why that makes this one not hold up as much, but I don't know. It's really hard to say, because it really did like sort of set the indie world on fire in 2009. I think the accessibility of it has a huge thing to do with it. You know, while Strawberry Jam was like accessible, it's still weird. You know, Feels definitely had weird stuff. You know, the further back you go, you know, the weirder it gets. And then this one is just like sort of. I feel like, you know, you could play My Girls. Maybe if you trimmed it up a little bit, you could play My Girls just on the, you know, regular top 40 kind of station, and maybe even like Summertime Clothes and maybe some other stuff.
I was amazed. Like I was amazed to read that this album reached number 13 on the Billboard charts. It was like surrounded by, you know, Pink and like Mariah Carey and stuff. It was a success, a real success.
I think that really like kind of describes it. Like it's like sort of a crossover hit. It's like one of the only experimental crossover hit records, you know, like really, like what else can you think of that is, I mean, but this level of experimentation? They did this on
purpose. They did it on purpose. Don't you think?
Yeah, no.
I mean, they stepped into this.
Yeah, I think the intent was to try to clean up a bit and tighten up to make, you know, a solid record, you know, but what I was going to ask you guys, you know, in that article that we read from Pitchfork, it briefly mentions the fact that they may or may not have turned down a few opportunities for their songs to be licensed for commercials. You know, if we were to go back and have them actually do that, do you think that would alter the right? Like, do you think that would have pushed them from number 13 to closer to like number 1 or something like that, if they had just maybe tried a bit more when it came to, getting the record out there, right?
That's one of those things that can backfire on you, like,
that's what I was thinking.
if they did it like, maybe this record would bump up to number 10 or number 8 or something on the Billboard because, regular people would hear it. But I think they would lose, a lot of people, the whole sellout thing, they would lose a bit of their core audience, who I think probably sticks around. Those are the people who are listening to Painting With or whatever that new record was.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the ones you want to keep, I think. I think it's a good move to not.
Yeah. I mean, credibility was really important.
Yeah, especially in 2009,
It's just before the Poptimist turn when selling out is not selling out. And so it's, I think that was wise. And, in trying to get back at this, why was it so acclaimed at the time and why the backlash now? And we've talked about this sort of hyper-focusing, this sort of accessibility, the bigness, the hugeness of the sound. I mean, the album is called, Merriweather Post Pavilion, which is a large venue that they had never played at the time.
Yeah.
Because they weren't big enough to play it. And they got a chance to play after this album made them, stars. And so that's quite, they're quite clear about their intentions to take it to the next level, right? And everything about the sound, there's stories about they, were really interested in capturing a kind of live experience on the record to the point where they are actually like recording their PA system. They brought their PA into the studio, which normally you wouldn't do such a thing, but they wanted it to sound like it would sound coming out of a PA. And I think that's some of the abrasiveness, but also some of just the brightness of the synth sounds. I mean, they sound huge. They sound like this is I guess a little before the EDM wave hit, but the synth washes are so bright and big that they would play in an outdoor stadium. It'll carry. I feel like all of this was intentional, and it sounds like, do you guys think that that's part of the reason for the backlash? Because it's a little bit, like a watered down version of Animal Collective?
I think it gives, I read that same thing about the PA and everything, and it's really interesting. It's a cool idea, but I think it does kind of give it like a little dated of a feel because like you mentioned, the EDM stuff that comes after, it's sort of like almost, I don't want to say it pushes it into that, but I think it like makes you sort of think of it,
Yeah.
I don't think it like, I don't want anybody to get me wrong. I don't think it sounds the same, but I think it makes them very close in the way the sound sounds.
Well, something I was thinking about that had come out around that same time. It was the year before, and that was MGMT's Kids, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And, do you guys think that there's any song on this record that is comparable to Kids and that could have been as popular? Or is it just approaching that?
I think My Girls could have been if it was a little, trimmed up a little bit to get rid of the fluff, and if maybe they had done something like Let It Be in a commercial or something that where it just got pushed into, the clubs, even maybe the more like undergroundish kind of clubs, but still, still that next level. I think them not doing that kind of stuff is what kept it like a level or two below that, but I think it definitely had the potential to have done it.
I think it did. And I think it sounds a little bit of that time, which is part of the reason why maybe it feels a bit dated now. So, in trying to analyze this backlash, I thought a lot about it. And initially I was thinking, because I will be honest that, I guess I was complaining a little bit, but I started to really appreciate this for what it is, this album. I think that there is that kind of lull in the second half, whether you disagree with me or not.
Which I do.
It hurts the momentum a little bit, and there's kind of a sameness to the album that makes it feel like a little bit impenetrable and a little bit too long. But most of the album is really, really strong, and I think that and transcendently so. I think that when you finish. For one example, when you finish Brother Sport, I think this is part of the reason for why it was so acclaimed. I mean, Brother Sport is such a rush. It is such a amazing song.
Yes.
That when you finish it, you're pretty sure you just heard the best album ever made. I mean, that's how good that song is. And it just makes you want to like start it again.
Yes.
And then that first half is so strong, it like carries you right through.
It just tricks you.
Yeah, you might just like keep listening and you're like, I'm kind of bored by half of this, but it like starts and ends so strong that I'm like totally in. And there's something about that. But then with this backlash, I started to think, all right, is it the quality of the album? Okay, maybe it was overhyped a little bit. People are calling it like a complete masterpiece. And I think it is an interesting, bold new sound, but it's a little of its time. And it's maybe not song for song, like perfectly, flawless or anything like that. But it's still a really great album. Maybe it's the dated quality. But then I'm thinking, what do you guys think? In 10 more years, things that seem dated, they don't always sound dated. I was thinking about something like the Cure's Disintegration. That came out in 1989. Within like 2 years, music didn't sound anything like that anymore. And it must have sounded so old, like, can you imagine that? Disintegration is like 3 years old and it sounds like it's from, a decade ago. So with a little time, do you think this will stop sounding dated?
No, I was thinking about that, and I think it will stop sounding dated. I think I was thinking about like this could be one of those things that in 10 years, our kids or something like find, and it's like an interesting sort of gem of it, and I was thinking sort of like Kraftwerk, like when Kraftwerk first came out, that was like mind-blowing, crazy, but once like drum machines and stuff got better, it probably sounded pretty dated in the like 80s or something. And then now, you look back and it's amazing again. And I kind of feel like this record sort of has that potential. Disintegration's another good example. Like I feel like that probably would have been pretty dated a couple years after it, but now, absolute classic unless you ask Darren. And I think this one will do that too. I really could see this being like one of those, like one of those nuggets kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of don't think it sounds like too dated. You know what I mean? Because like I mentioned, like 2010 happened, and there wasn't really a record that I recall that sounded like Merriweather. You know what I mean? Like it had already like left it behind, and coming to it now 10 years later, I don't know, I found it like almost a little refreshing. I was very surprised that I was able to get back into like loving this record again. But but here's
the thing, you said that in the past couple of years you just had this bad taste in your mouth, that Animal Collective and Merriweather were so outdated, and not everybody is going to spend 2 intensive weeks listening for a podcast, so like what is it like? What do you think, Darren? Why do people have that feeling?
So this might be like a personal complaint, but like I wanted to talk about the show that I went to just for a moment. And so you guys said it was in 2011. Is that when?
That's when Gabe and I went. I think yours.
I think you went the previous tour.
Yeah, I feel like I went before that, but you guys weren't there.
No.
Okay, so it was like it was like one of the worst shows I can remember, right? Because I was like so hyped, obviously, about Merriweather, and I was so excited to like listen to that record played live. You know what I mean? And I didn't really, I kind of knew about Animal Collective's like tendency to experiment during live, shows, but remember when I was doing the little bootleg thing, like they were actually playing their songs. They were playing the songs live. So that was sort of my expectation, that I'd be hearing the record and maybe a little bit of experimentation, right? But first you had, what was the band that you mentioned, Dan, that opened for him? Black Dice, right?
Black Dice, yeah.
They opened and they were so loud, like super duper loud, that like when Animal Collective took the stage, it's like when you're about to watch a film, like the previews come on and they're usually not as loud, but then the film is nice and loud. Like they weren't loud enough because Black Dice before them was so loud. So that was already a problem. But then, if I remember correctly, and I may be making this up in my mind somehow, but the show was terrible because they didn't play any of the songs. They didn't play hardly anything off of Merriweather. It was just experimenting, jamming, just weirdness. Like I was just so turned off by it. And I wonder
when we saw them, it was the same way.
Right, and that's their style, right? That's their thing, and like hardcore fans obviously love that sort of thing. And I wonder if like people who became fans of Merriweather sort of got that same sort of experience and then felt like, because I distanced myself from Animal Collective basically right after that. Like after that show, I was like, I don't really care to listen to them, right now. And I didn't check out Centipede. I hadn't listened to a single record after that.
Well, we had a similar experience because we saw them after Merriweather, and they played a bunch of like jammy stuff that nobody knew, and so everybody just stood there kind of like just staring, and we decided to just start jumping around and trying to make it fun. Remember this, Dan? And a couple people were like, "You knock it the fuck off, I'm trying to listen," and like
those neck
it was a bad vibe.
Yeah
Bad vibe. But yeah, so, but that was something that was kind of like bold and interesting about them as part of their mythos before that. Since then, they've abandoned that. They released a live album, which I actually kind of like, Live at 9:30. And it's kind of a mixture of new and old songs. And so in the past few years, if you see them, they play, they play a couple hits. They just are touring their record like all normal bands. But there was something very exciting about this myth, like, oh my God, they don't play anything that they have written yet, like once the record's recorded, they throw it all out and they just start new, like there was something cool and experimental about that. And they were genuinely very experimental. I think part of the fun of Animal Collective, that's another thing I wanted to mention, is that, to me, what I liked about Animal Collective is they would have these pure pop moments, something like Grass, that is so thrilling, but you got to wade through a bunch of like experimental shit to get there, It's not the easiest listening, but when the big moments come, they like really hit. Merriweather, they kind of have done away with all that. It's the first time really where it's just kind of like the pop explosion after pop explosion after pop explosion. I think that's a little bit tiring, but okay. So maybe you're getting at some kind of pretentiousness. I think you also mentioned that nothing in 2010 sounded like Animal Collective that much. Maybe that's not exactly true. I was thinking like Beach House's Teen Dream is kind of this similar vibe and stuff.
That's fair.
But this is the beginning. I mean, 2010 is when we talked about it last week. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy comes out and changes the music landscape toward poptimism, right? And to be fair, this Merriweather came out at the very beginning of 2009, and Fantasy came out, I guess, toward the end of 2010. So it's more like a 2-year gap. But very quickly, just like what happened with The Cure's Disintegration, music changed radically. Indie was out. Do you think? And it's similar to Disintegration in the sense that it seems to sum up its era, but the era ended immediately after. You know what I'm saying, Dan? Like,
yeah, it's
is that
like
just
really
unlucky?
kind of. Yeah, I mean, it's really sort of the end of the book, and yeah, I guess that is just. Is it like bad luck, or is it that like your album is so good that nobody else wants to try that anymore? I feel like it could almost be either one. More so with Disintegration, I'll say, but yeah, I don't know. That is kind of shit luck.
Yeah, see, I think it's like poptimism starts, and there's another dimension to this. I don't know how much time we want to spend on it, but we talked a lot about it last week, how poptimism has a an element of it, which is, it's explicitly anti-indie rock for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons are cultural, social, in the sense of indie rock and rock in general is a bunch of like fratty white boys, and they're kind of pretentious. These white boys in Animal Collective with their tribal drums appropriating African rhythms, and it's rock criticism for the past forever has been about celebrating like these white musicians and stuff, and we got to bring in new voices who listen to other stuff. And so it's like, what I'm trying to ask is it just the normal backlash of, oh, musical styles changed, or is this like a bigger backlash of Animal Collective is the figurehead, the face of indie, the whitest genre that ever existed, and now we got to tear it down?
No, I think somebody like Vampire Weekend's a bit whiter than Animal Collective.
They're a good candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely a level of pretentiousness in Animal Collective and also being a fan of Animal Collective. I mean,
Sure.
there were not many people in my life then or now that I would feel like, yeah, I'm going to put on, an Animal Collective record and we're going to be able to listen to it together, like an entire record. Like it just, just doesn't work because there's just so many like weird elements to it, stuff that I personally love, but I just think like, for instance, you guys know I have a family, so these past 2 weeks has been me sort of experimenting with like, all right, I'm going to put some Animal Collective on and see how the wife and kids pick up on it. And, if they had anything to say, it was like, why is he screaming? Why is he it's just a repeated scream. You know what I mean? What's going on? You know what I mean? So, and I think that is part of the reason why, the album was like well accepted at first, but then you go one album behind that and an album after that, and you don't find what was once there. This one record exists by itself for a band that is known for not being this accessible. You know what I mean? Like they intentionally are not accessible. So
yeah,
I mean, it's hard for just one record in a band's discography to somehow carry them all the way through for a decade when they've made a career out of making fringe music, but in terms of pop, like they're on the fringe. They are not MGMT, they're not Vampire Weekend. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that, and that's kind of the transition. I mean, we didn't really mention it, but Animal Collective basically became the face of Pitchfork throughout their duration as a band. They became, the new Radiohead, which was Pitchfork gave every single thing that they released a higher and higher score until this album, Merriweather, got a 9.6. And, they all but declared it the greatest album of the decade. And I think they even gave My Girl's Song of the Year this year as well, this album of the year. They really made it their band. So then and that was when Pitchfork was a fringe music website, an alternative music website. So when things switched into, we celebrate mainstream music now, not only do you got to kind of get rid of Animal Collective, but you got to kind of disavow that whole, distance yourself from that whole ethos. And like I said, I do think there are some sort of racial components to that it just gives you a bad taste in your mouth. It gives you that's when like every music critic was white and all they wrote about was their favorite white rock bands. And so this is a particularly vicious backlash. Will they recover? Will we ever look back at Animal Collective fondly, as a culture here?
I mean, I think, yeah. I think that's similar to the question before, I think it has the potential to be like Disintegration and stuff where looking, it gets old, but then looking back, you can see the goodness. I think like people will look at Merriweather as sort of the last good thing. Centipede Hurts was pretty bad. Painting With is god awful. I never listened to that Tangerine Reef or whatever. So I don't know. I don't think they'll ever make a comeback in making another record that sets the world on fire. But I think looking back, yeah, I think Merriweather eventually will kind of regain maybe not all of its status, but at least a good bit of it. And I think things like Feels kind of still holds it in that like real kind of, like underground kind of way. I think it's looked as like a still a good record.
I just think we're not alone in having that kind of bad taste in our mouth about Animal Collective as a whole. I think we could just talk about it for a second. We've kind of touched on it numerous times, but it sounds like a lot of us revisited some of their past work as well these past 2 weeks. And, I got to say, I was really, really impressed. I think I said it earlier, but I was really, really impressed just as a whole. And I feel confident now that eventually we will look back on Animal Collective fondly as really one of the defining acts of their era. I mean, that's a 10-year run where they transform from really out there, like freak folk, campfire shaman thing going on. And they evolve pretty gracefully into, it's indie, it's fringe, but they sound like the biggest, most important band in the world on Merriweather. that 10-year run, once we get a little more distance, I think is going to be, it's going to be like as impressive as, how many bands for 10 years grow and evolve with every album and stay that consistently good?
Yeah, that's a short list for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I still think overall I don't look at Animal Collective as a whole as fondly as I once did. I think there's an opportunity in the future to look back on them and, I can imagine Dan sort of mentioned this, but like future generations sort of discovering them in the same way that we did, like as just a gem, something that just you had never heard in, 2030 or whatever it may be, and something you hadn't even known about when you were exploring past music. And when you find Animal Collective, I think that you will be, your mind will probably be blown the very first time you come across it, just like ours were. But
yeah,
there's just something that's not like as transcendent about their catalog as, like Radiohead. Radiohead, bunch of white guys, but like you don't really think of them that way. They are something beyond all of that, and they transcend, like race and culture and all this sort of thing. Like, OK Computer, 1997. Who cares? Like, it's an album. It's a timeless record. You know what I mean? And I don't know if Animal Collective has something like that.
Another weird thing I'm just thinking of is that, Animal Collective, the one thing that makes them sound so dated as well is that they are so apolitical. And today, music is all political. It's not going to be popular or critically acclaimed unless it's, political in all the right ways, right? Animal Collective just has nothing political to say at all. And I think some people, some critics of this era would be sort of turned off by that because that's really important to them, the politics of music. And they would say, well, that's, the ultimate white privilege to just be able to write a bunch of albums about dancing or about around a fire and pretending to be children, but there is something, a little bit timeless about that I think will age really well. That they I don't know, their mission statement as a band is just kind of like wonder and terror and imagination, and that's never going to get old, I don't think.
Well, can we talk? What do you guys think, though? Here's a question, right? You have a hit record in 2009. You are Animal Collective, right? What's the next step? I feel like that next step could have lasting impact on their legacy, and that next step would, in reality, what ended up happening was something like Centipede Hurts, which I think was a massive misstep, and then basically everything after that was just a move in a totally different direction. Like, should they have stuck with the Merriweather type of formula or pushed even closer into like pop or something? What would you guys have done if you looking back, like if you wanted to try to change the legacy and make them a band that people don't have, that are fond of no matter what, right?
Yeah, that's a tough spot for them because especially like their whole career, basically, they're sort of changing and morphing between records, and then they hit with this record that is like a basically a crossover hit into the normal world. It's like what do you do next? Because you're gonna, no matter what you do, you're gonna alienate somebody. If you just make Merriweather Part 2, you're gonna alienate your old fans who like the experimentation and like the shaping, shift shaping between records. But if you do that, you're going to alienate, your newfound, pop fans. So you're really in like a between a rock and a hard place. It's really tough. And I think that's been the downfall of a lot of bands. And, I think as much as I dislike Centipede Hurts, I'm glad that they at least didn't fall in the trap of just making Merriweather Part 2,
Sure. Yeah, there's something about Centipede Hurts. It just feels a little ordinary. There's something about Merriweather that like they're pretty simple pop songs, but it has this transcendent quality. And then it's like the bubble is burst on Centipede Hurts, where you're like, oh, they just write like kind of little pop songs and they put noises on them, which I think is an overstatement. But my opinion, if they should have called me, because the best thing you can do when you're backed up against the wall and you can't possibly live up to the hype is put out like the most challenging, difficult double album that people
idea.
will argue about for decades about like whether it's brilliant or it's a complete disaster. You do that, and then you take so much heat off yourself. Then you can actually like make whatever record you want to make, after that, because it's gonna cool down the hype a little bit. They'll be like, I don't know, some people will be like, they're the greatest, and other people will be like, they've totally lost it, and you can just kind of do whatever you want. But that's what I would have told them. Okay,
that's smart. That's actually really good.
All right, we got to get to this. We've been kind of dancing around it, but Pitchfork published a pretty interesting article for the anniversary, the 10th anniversary, called Animal Collective's Merriweather Post-Pavilion was radical enough to redefine indie music. Why didn't it? Written by Larry Fitzmaurice, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And yes, I recognize the irony of bringing up Pitchfork after we spent our entire last episode shitting on them. We've already done that a couple of times. But, to be honest, the article was interesting. It had a lot of interesting sort of background information, I think, but it didn't seem to me to really answer the central question, which I think we should discuss a little bit more. And we kind of have a little bit, but, do you agree that Merriweather didn't have much of an influence on indie and popular music? And, why or why not?
Yeah, I think we sort of touched on it before. Merriweather sort of seems like the bookend of that era of music. It is the sort of disintegration where it's sort of the end of it. But the other thing is I'm not 100% sure what the beginning of it is, because Merriweather is like pretty different. Like I can't think of another record that sounds exactly like Merriweather or anything. So I don't know. I mean, maybe the weirdness is what keeps it from influencing a lot, because maybe just other people don't want to do that, or don't think that way, or don't want to think that way, or something else. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think that's why the article spends so much time kind of like building up to something, but then not really able to answer the question. It mentions a couple of other albums that came out that same year by Grizzly Bear and Dirty Projectors, and then kind of it seems to suggest that like that was basically it, and music seemed to have moved on. But did it? I mean, popular music or indie music kind of started to blend into the mainstream, right? With like electro pop, right? I mean, that's kind of
we talked about that last week, how indie really did just collide with the mainstream. Like the mainstream is kind of indie now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I mean, that's what Merriweather is at the heart. I mean, it's
certainly an important step in that direction.
For sure.
And also, if you were in like a band or something around this time, if you're in high school or something, you saw a lot of bands, local bands, just ripping off Animal Collective. I think about like before Animal Collective, local rock bands, no loop pedals, no looper pedals. After, you could not start a band without a bunch of loop pedals. I mean, you had to be like looping like blippy, fluttery noises over everything. You just like write a normal rock song, and it's just like, all right, is going to be going over. Like it was like, oh, we got to have some maracas. Like we gotta, because Animal Collective like plays crazy percussion instruments. I mean, I don't know if it affected the mainstream that much, but there's a whole world. I mean, I remember seeing some dude play some local show, and he was like, he looked like Panda Bear and sounded like Panda Bear, and was just, kind of doing on his laptop, like kind of mixing like, it was like proto vaporwave or something, just like weird samples, and just sort of like moaning of, poor imitation of Brian Wilson over the top the whole time. And, and I think me and you, Darren, we were making music at the time. Mm-hmm. We did a bunch of ripping off of Animal Collective. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. The song that starts this podcast was like me deliberately saying to myself, I'm going to attempt to write an Animal Collective song. I'm just gonna rip them off completely, and then I'm gonna throw some like Neutral Milk Hotel style horns over it, and that'll be it. I mean, that was it. And then there was experimenting in like, if you remember, Gabe, like we would take a drum set and say, you know what, let's just play with like 2 toms, you know what I mean? Because like Animal Collective will just be real tribal and stuff. Like that's just what we were gonna do. We're not gonna use like your hi-hat and your snares or anything like that.
Yeah, that was like a huge thing. Maybe like the next big mainstream bands didn't do that, and because all music journalists around that time just decided to only cover like top 40 Billboard radio from then on, you didn't notice. But I think there was a whole world in the local and underground scene that was like radically transformed by Animal Collective. And I think about stuff like, isn't like Fleet Foxes and Bon Iver just kind of like Starbucks version of Animal Collective, like the Beach Boys harmonies and kind of like interesting arrangements, like a little bit of like weird, like how every time A.B. Terrace sings on Merriweather, he's got like some weird effect on his voice or something. It's almost like a vocoder. And then Bon Iver's like, what if I just bought a vocoder? That would be perfect. I really feel like it did affect stuff. It's just within a couple of years, everything had changed.
No, I agree. I think Bon Iver, Fleet Foxes, that whole sort of, and it was sort of centered around 2010-ish, like that folk, Starbucks folk thing really did take off. And yeah, I never really, until you brought that up, I never really thought that is like pretty watered down version of Animal Collective.
I know. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention earlier, I wanted to see if you got any of this, Dan, but re-listening to these albums was really fun this week because, I was so young when they came out, and now I have like a much better musical, vocabulary. And, I'm realizing stuff like, wow, this sounds a lot like, Gas, like Wolfgang Voigt, like this kind of ambient techno. I mean, there's like stuff in these tracks that's like basically electronic music, something like Banshee Beat or Fireworks or something is like a techno song but played on instruments. And I'm thinking like, okay, maybe it's not tribal drums, that's what we all used to say, oh, they just beat on the tom. But it's like, Panda Bear has an actual he talks often about his love of electronic and techno music, and it's like, what do 3 kids in a garage in Baltimore, they want to make techno music, but they don't have any equipment. Like, do the bass drum with the tom, just hit it. And then somebody else will play the hi-hat part. It's almost like, I never really recognized that. I never really recognized like the Arthur Russell vibes on, especially something like Spirit They've Gone and stuff has like the real kind of weirdness to it. I was thinking also of like Person Pitch is just like early Steve Reich, with like the Come Out to Show, like the looped vocal samples that are phasing in and out of each other and stuff. I mean, I was kind of like impressed that like they were a genuinely fearless experimental band coming up.
Yeah, I agree. I've thought about a lot too. I think one of the things like when this record first came out, it like really blew my mind because a lot of the sounds I just like. I didn't know how you could make that. So, like I knew it was a synthesizer, but that's all I knew. And like now I know more about that stuff. I have messed with synthesizers and all, and it was a lot more of the sounds I could figure out what they were doing, and like I understood it better. And that like I think that sort of took back like it's a little peek behind the screen, a little bit like sometimes you see how a magic trick's done. It's not as grand anymore, or how a stunt in a movie or something. I got a little bit of that listening,
but I think they were really courageous at their time, because another thing about Merriweather is that they were the first indie rock band to say, we're not going to use guitars anymore. And now nobody uses guitars.
Yeah.
That was actually pretty forward thinking and cool. And, you think of them as this kind of like early Animal Collective as this like kind of freak folk campfire thing. But even from the start, they were very interested in strange electronic sounds. They saw it's not like they were like, oh, we got to get back to the woods. Like we got to like capture nature or whatever. They were like, any sound they thought was cool, like weird glitchy stuff. It was, and I think a lot of that comes from that like electronic influence I never really appreciated before, but they were a little I think they were just more fearless than I really even recognized at the time, and really really creative. And I think we're running low on time. We should talk about final thoughts, but I think my final thought is God bless Animal Collective. They were really a great band.
You speak of them as if like they're just finished.
Well, yeah, we won't talk about what came after Merriweather, but you know, they were the best of all time at the time, though, is what I'll say.
Oh, nice Kanye. Yeah, I agree. You know, I sort of had a little bit of like what Darren said, where if you had asked me if I liked Animal Collective, I'd probably say nah, not anymore. But I was a little wrong. I think that they are better than I gave them credit for. Looking back, especially the older stuff, you know, I really Feels has probably always been my favorite Animal Collective record, but I haven't listened to that in a long time. And you know, going back to it, I appreciated it a lot, and I appreciated Merriweather. So I think as a whole that they definitely, yeah, you know, I was a little wrong. And any time I've shit on them in the last 7-8 years.
Yeah, you know, I think I might owe them an apology, right? You know, I said some pretty mean things and was kind of like they're really bad and they've aged, you know, terribly. Largely because I just departed from them and just did not come back to those records like at all. And there's probably a million reasons why that is, but you know, I gave them a full 2 weeks of my attention and they really won me back over. You know, I remembered why I loved them back then. I remember why I was so inspired to write music like them. That same type of inspiration came surging back in after listening to the earlier records and listening to this one. And, you know, you mentioned it, Gabe, like Brother Sport alone just makes you want to like listen to the album over and over again. And in fact, Brother Sport makes me want to like, I put Brother Sport on repeat a couple times. Like I just wanted to hear that song over and over again because it was just such a great song. And I don't even remember loving it this much back in 2009, which I think says something. That's important for a record, that when you come back to it, you discover something new or you fall in love with a different part of the album that, you know, and, you know, maybe in 2009, I would probably have said Lion in a Coma is, you know, definitely my favorite. But like now I still feel that way. But Brother Sport kind of came out of nowhere and really, really stuck with me, I think, through this time. So, you know, in general, I think Animal Collective is definitely worth the attention of somebody who has never listened to them. Absolutely. Like they are a band that everyone who cares about music should explore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're somebody who, like us, listened to them 10 years ago and may have abandoned them because of like recent records and whatnot, definitely worth going back because those records are way better than you may be remembering.
Well said.
Well, that being said, are any of us gonna add Animal Collective, you know, back into our rotations, or in 10 more years are we gonna say, man, you know, I haven't listened to Animal Collective in 10 years?
All right, 2 straight weeks of it. I need a little break.
Yeah,
to be
we'll come back
honest.
for the 20th.
Yeah.
We'll see.
All right. Well, I think that's enough for this week. So what did you think? We'd love to hear your thoughts, and maybe we'll read those on the air. You can email us. The email is popshieldpod@gmail.com. Next episode in 2 weeks, we're going to make a classic Weezer album out of tracks from their bad albums. So... yeah, that sounds like an insurmountable task. But if you like the show, help us out by subscribing and leaving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Stay connected: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that junk. It's Pop Shield Pod, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. See ya.
Peace.
So long.